Okay, Dan. I like how I always start the Fargo pods with like, all right, Dan, here we are. We're back. But we're reviewing Fargo 1996 today. The OG, the original. Besides starting a franchise, which is surprising within itself, I would say. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. It won 2. It won, obviously, Best Actress in a Leading Role with Frances McDormand. And it also won Best Writing. It also was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role for William H. Macy. Best Director for the Coen Brothers. Best Cinematography for Roger Deakins. He wouldn't win one for 20 more years.
Until Blade Runner.
Blade Runner 2048. 2049.
2049, yeah.
2048 is a game, an app. Best Film Editing. And then, of course, it was nominated for Best Picture. This is all to say that Fargo was a very, very successful movie. For me, Fargo is older than me, and it has always been around since I was little. My father showed me when I was very young, and the movie kind of scared me with the wood chipper scene, but this is all to say that Fargo was very successful in its own right before the TV show.
I think that's a great place to start because, yeah, it's interesting that you say, like, it's always been around because it is older than both of us. And even though it's not that much older than either of us, like when I was a kid, I remember my dad being like, have you seen Fargo yet? And I was like, no. And he's like, oh, you got to watch that. That's a classic. So even by the time I was like 9 or something, it was a classic. And I think what's interesting too is like that moment in the mid 90s was so big for the crime genre because you got Pulp Fiction and you got Fargo, and they're completely redefining and rewriting the rules of what a crime story should be. With Pulp Fiction, it turns it into this very, very cool, slick, different kind of crime piece. And then with Fargo, it does the inverse of that, and it makes it It's intentionally uncool in so many ways. It's remarkably sincere and remarkably simple. And we'll talk about that a lot, I think, because it is a really simple movie. It's a short movie. It's only an hour 38. The fact that it was successful is kind of amazing because it is simple, but it's hard to do simple well. And
kind of jumping off that, I suppose, I'm going to surprise you with something. I don't know if you knew.
Please.
But doing some last minute research into Fargo, and while I was saying like, oh, Fargo's always been intended as its own thing, that's it. Well, in 1997, a pilot was filmed for a TV show.
Oh.
And the director of it was none other than another huge 90s star, Kathy Bates.
Really?
Eddie Falco was in it as Marge Gunderson. And the could you imagine if I just was like, this is all a joke, I'm just making this shit up? No.
Yeah, this is just a long con.
Yeah, this is a long con. But like it's actually real. So it's just funny to think that the Coen brothers always like understood that this had legs and they could do this, as a TV show one day. Again, the entire pilot is on YouTube. You can just look up like Fargo unaired pilot. It'll be like 2003. I just put it in our chat, Dan. It looks like Fargo, but it doesn't feel like it. They couldn't get it in 1997 correctly, but by 2014 they nailed it. But yeah, let's jump into it, I suppose. After our long little surprise fest with our little preamble. Our preamble, as it were. We the people.
I'd love to start with the thing that hits you in the mouth right when you start watching the movie, and that's the music. The music is so grand and so big, and it comes in such stark contrast to the imagery that we're seeing and to some of the goals of the characters. Like everything in this movie is small, but the music is so big that it makes the mundanity feel important.
You're in Fargo when you hear the first music stings and you just see white, but like the actual film opens up with just like a blank white. You're in the snow, you can't tell really what's going on, and there's just this beautiful black text that comes on with the music. And again, it's like a classical type feeling.
It makes it feel like this is a story that's older than 1987. Like the small town crime is a thing that goes back as far as you can imagine. And so this music kind of, I don't think that's anything that was intentional necessarily, but it definitely creates like a historical feeling to it also.
I think that's a good way to put Fargo, really. I think what they're doing here is kind of making like a timeless tale. And I think you can see it with and again, we keep talking about the TV show, but I think it's just interesting to think about because it's like you really can put it in any time and it still feels like Fargo. It still works. It can be in the 50s. It can be in the early 2000s. It can be in the 70s. I really like the music in it, and I think it just helps to create the Fargo feeling in something.
Yeah, it sets the tone right off the bat, and I guess something that we also should have mentioned also was the this is a true story thing. You know, I just want to tip my hat to the Coen brothers. Like, what a clever, artistic, and intelligent choice to play with the idea of truth in cinema. Like, the idea that documentary is truth is a fallacy. Like, that it's impossible. And this movie is very documentarian in its approach to cinematography and in its approach to some of the character work. And so they're playing with the idea of like, this is factual and this is truth, but we all know that movies are not truth. Like, even if they're trying to get to the heart of some sort of truth, they are lying to you in some way, and we are going to lie to you right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And we're just, it's so fun. And it's like, who would have thought of that other than the Coen brothers? Nobody.
Yeah. And it's a very like magician thing to do, kind of, too. Like, it just like raises the stakes right away, and it's just like, this is just gonna help with intensity later, and like that's just all it is. It's a very showman thing. It's a very like con man thing in some ways, but again, it makes the film better. It also makes you discuss it in a different light. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure, like, similar to the Blair Witch Project when that came out in the 90s. God, everyone was just like, whoa, what the fuck? Like, all these true stories are crazy, but it's literally just like people, like, it's the directors and everything just lying to the audience, and then the audience discussing it like it was a true story. I remember it's funny that both our fathers showed us this when we were little, and we're like, oh, this is a classic film. You have to watch it. It's a very dad film if
totally.
They were raising someone in the early 2000s. But I digress. It's, you know, it just adds to this discussion. And my dad always said, like, people were talking about it like it was real. Like, he said the same thing with the Blair Witch Project.
And I think by adding this is a true story thing, these events really happened, the names and dates are all changed. It's simultaneously, by saying that this is a true story, adds and removes authenticity. It adds authenticity because now you feel like these characters are real, like these are real human beings. And so then you can emotionally develop with them a little bit more, because like you're thinking, oh, this actually happened. These are real people just like me. And then it also removes the authenticity, because once you know that it's not true, or once you start to get a clue that it's not true, then you can kind of remove yourself a little bit and be like, they're lying to me. Movies lie to me. Like, this is all a big magic trick. Like you said, I think the idea of that being like the long con is really interesting, because it's a movie about a con, and here are two con artists at the top of the bill, you know?
Yeah. And that's something, again, we'll do something with the Coen brothers one day, because they're one of my favorite directors working right now. But that's what they do so well in all of their movies, is authenticity. And that's why Fargo works so well, is because it's authentic. It feels real without being real. And the Coens just know how to make movies. And that's like, they're like a good stand-up, because they make it look so easy. You listen to good stand-up comedy, you're like, I can do this. You're like, I can totally do stand-up comedy. And then it's like, no, you actually can't, because it's impossible to do. And it's the same thing with the Coens. They make a movie and you're like, I can make a movie.
That's a great point. And we go through this now fairly often. Like, there are some directors that make movies, like Bong Joon-ho makes Parasite, and you're like, I could never. Then you watch a movie like Fargo and you're like, this is so simple and I could totally do this. Like, I could make a movie. And that's a great point, because they make it look easy, and it's definitely not. And a big part of that is picking your collaborators. And that's a perfect segue to talk about my guy, Roger Deakins.
Yeah.
This was the third movie that they did together, Deakins and the Coen brothers. Highly recommend everyone listen to the Team Deakins podcast. It's it's a wealth of knowledge if you're interested in filmmaking, if you want to become a DP or a filmmaker of any kind. Roger Deakins is the greatest living cinematographer. And so to have a podcast where he talks every week with other filmmakers is like, I mean, how lucky are we to live in this universe? So they did an episode where they just focused on Fargo. They flipped the tables, and instead of Roger and James talking to other filmmakers, they had Joshua James Richards come in and talk to them about Fargo. And there's just a whole bunch of little nuggets in there that I would highly recommend. So I'll just briefly mention a couple. But it was the third film that they did together, and they had just come off of Barton Fink and Hudsucker Proxy, which are very different movies than this movie in terms of like the lighting and the cinematography and all of that. They pitched Deakins on the idea that like, hey, we're going to do this movie. It's going to be for a much smaller budget, and it's going to be a much smaller crew, and it's going to be something you probably wouldn't be interested in. And so Deakins was like, what are you kidding? Like, of course, if it's you guys, I'll do it. And so a lot of the simplicity of shot creation and cinematography is in part due to the style that they were going for, but also in part due to the fact that it was just a smaller budgeted film. They couldn't lay a lot of track, so they didn't do a lot of push-ins. There was a lot of static camera work. There's only a few push-ins in the movie, and like they really stand out. Like when Buscemi in the beginning of the movie is talking and the camera just slowly pushes in on him, it's like, this guy's a bad guy. These guys are dangerous. And I think what I really appreciate, and what Joshua James Richards said in this interview, was Fargo is timeless because of the simple camera choices. There's not a flashy camera choice at any point. The cinematography allows the story to do the work. It doesn't get in the way of anything. There's a chef whose name is Marco Pierre White who talks about how you can't reinvent a dish. You can only refine a dish. I feel like that kind of principle applies here. Like Coen brothers were like, no, we're just gonna refine. We're just gonna refine what is the basic language of cinema.
And what's funny about like all those people in the 90s, like Tarantino and stuff, who they were trying to reinvent the wheel. They were still, like, to do this chef analogy with this, they were still using the same recipe.
Yeah.
They weren't fully reinventing cinema because, again, the cinema dish has already been created. And again, it's just refining over the years. Do we want to move on from this discussion and talk characters? What's next on your list? I think before we talk about the characters, I just want to say that another reason why this movie holds up so well is because it's not cynical. We were talking about this before we started recording, but the movie is about bad people doing bad things. The difference between season 1 of the show and the movie is like, I actually like Martin Freeman's character, even though he does bad things. And like, I don't necessarily like Jerry Lundegaard in this movie. It's just the performance of William H. Macy that makes him tolerable because he's like such a charming actor. But like as a character, like he doesn't really have a redeeming moment. Like he doesn't have a moment where he's like really nice to his son or helps save a cat in a tree. He doesn't have that moment. It's just like he has his wife kidnapped and he's stupid. And so this movie could easily be cynical about that, and it could very easily like wag its finger, but it doesn't. And that's because the Coens are from Minnesota, and so they have a reverence for these types of people, not murderers and kidnappers, obviously, but just the North Dakota nice kind of attitude. They have an appreciation, a reverence for, and an understanding of, and you can feel that for sure. Because like if this movie was wagging its finger at these people, it would be cringy. Like we would be watching it and going like, you're trying to tell us something, aren't you? Yeah.
And that would only last so long. I think a lot of this is kind of a tangent, but like a lot of the time Oscar nominated movies are of the time that they are nominated.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's also because like they're trying to tell you something that in the moment feels big, but ultimately is of the moment. And Fargo is, whether they were trying to or not, it just ends up becoming of any moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying, and let's just segue into arguably, like, I guess he's a supporting character, and we'll talk about Marge in a moment, but I think Jerry Lundegaard is always a great first character to talk about in this film because he kind of gets the story in motion. He decides to kidnap his wife to blackmail his father-in-law into getting him more money, which is just such a stupidly idiotic idea to do in your family, to your family. But it is also just shows who Jerry Lundegaard is as a person. And it's interesting because Jerry Lundegaard and Lester Nygaard are like very similar character. They're definitely the same archetype within the Fargo universe. They're the good guy who like just like gets in over their head. But the difference between Jerry and Lester, I think, is that, and we'll talk about this more in Fargo season 1 when we review that next. But with Lester, I think Lester is someone you're oddly rooting for because he has such a shit life. Jerry has a fine life. Jerry just like wants more money to work on a project. Lester like has always been someone who is just a loser. And that's like something that like all of us can really identify with.
Yeah, and like Lester's wife is like so mean to him, and like he's a sympathetic character in that way. Yeah. And so when he makes the untimely decision to hit her over the head with a hammer, it's a mistake that's been boiling and boiling. But
for his whole life.
For his whole life. And so you can kind of get behind that because it's like, oh, you can only put somebody on the boiler for so long before something's going to happen.
Yeah.
But with, like you're saying, with Jerry, we just walk straight into the story and we're not able to like find out like really much about the relationship that he has with his wife. She seems nice. Like she doesn't do anything that's like, she's not, being mean to him at any point. She's not being mean to their son necessarily. There's nothing wrong with her that would make him do this. So there's only something wrong with him. Yeah,
like literally, it opens up. It opens up. It has like the car towing in the snow, and then it just immediately goes to the bar. And then Jerry's like, "All right, here's a bunch of money, and you're basically gonna kidnap my wife, and then we'll get all the money, and then you get a split, I get a split." And it's like, oh wow, this is Jerry. We're really getting into it here, and while I feel like we've talked enough about Jerry. William H. Macy is just one of the greatest actors. Whenever we talk about Fargo, we always talk about like this person being one of the greatest actors. But William H. Macy is, and he's only been nominated for one Oscar, and it was for this film. But I guess his main thing is Shameless. So like whatever, he does TV. But William H. Macy just is always so charismatic in everything, and he always plays like kind of a loser, especially in the 90s. I mean, the movie he did after this was Boogie Nights, and he's like a cuck in that movie, for lack of a better term. And you feel literally, literally, like you feel so bad for him in that movie. And I hope we talk about Paul Thomas Anderson and like Boogie Nights one day. But it's so funny because, like you were saying, like Jerry isn't written as sympathetic, and like he's really not sympathetic throughout. But like there's something with some actors where you look at them and you want to root for them. And when I was watching this movie for the first time, I always wanted William H. Macy to get out of it in some ways because he is just such an endearing guy as a person. And he adds so much to this performance. And Jerry would be a completely different character without him because he wouldn't have a shred of likability. But like because he's slightly likable, because like William H. Macy is so likable, it makes Jerry slightly likable, and it makes the film move like really, really well.
That's absolutely correct. I think that William H. Macy is. I mean, he had been acting at that point. I don't know how many movies or what kind of consciousness there was around William H. Macy at that time, but this was definitely like where he pops into the mainstream. And imagine like two things. One, imagine if the Coen brothers had a bigger budget for this movie. There's no way that William H. Macy is the main character. And then also, similarly, imagine if this movie was being made today. It would be like Benedict Cumberbatch or something. Like it would be Ryan Gosling. Like it wouldn't even make sense, you know? And no disrespect to those actors. I really like both of them. But it just wouldn't even make any sense. Like and Frances McDormand would certainly not be Marge. Like it would be Margot Robbie and it would be Ryan Gosling. And it just wouldn't make any sense at all for the character.
And
but
it would still be Steve Buscemi for some reason.
Yeah. But at this perfect moment in history where like they decide to take a smaller budget. Well, I don't know if they decided to, but they had a smaller budget. They find William H. Macy. There's nobody that could have done this better. And precisely for the reasons that you're talking about, William H. Macy, just there's something about his smile. He's very effective at playing the simpleton. Like my favorite characters in movies, and we've talked about this on the Bong Joon-ho series, are characters that are well-intentioned but stupid. Mm-hmm. They make simple mistakes. Jerry decides, I need money. So the best way to get money would be to have my wife kidnapped and then blackmail my father-in-law. She'll be okay because I'm running the show. Like there's nothing that could possibly go wrong. And then everything goes wrong. Mm-hmm. And you realize how bad of a plan it was to begin with. But like when you're just thinking it through in a desperate moment, like it kind of makes sense. Like, sure, like it's a fake kidnapping. Nothing could go wrong in a fake kidnapping, but then it's a real kidnapping.
Yes,
and
legitimately,
then everything goes wrong.
Everything goes wrong because transitioning to other characters, the two hitmen in this movie, they are some of the most odd couple characters I've seen on cinema, and it's Steve Buscemi and Peter Stormare. They're hired to just, all they have to do. This is a really funny part. Literally all they have to do is drive to kidnap a woman, which again is a lot, but they're two big men, so whatever. Kidnap a woman, drive her to a cabin, and just stay there for like four hours, maybe 3 days. I don't know. And that's all they have to do. But in classic Fargo fashion, everything just gets in the way. They're like driving on this like dark, desolate road, and they get pulled over for speeding, which again is such a simplistic thing. And then it just spirals out of control. There's some banging in the back of the trunk. Peter Stormare kills the cop. Then this is one of my favorite Fargo scenes ever. The cop is dead. They have a dead cop. Then on this road that no one's been on for an hour, a couple just drives by, and like their face, like it's a close up of their face, and they're like, what's going on here? And then they have to kill them. And then you realize how stupid the plan is because these hitmen are also really stupid, and they like act like on instinct. And like, you know, Steve Buscemi's character, Carl, is like really trying to like suave his way out of everything, but he's like not suave at all. Yes. And like Peter Stormare is just like so vicious and just like blunt in this movie. He like barely has any lines. It's such like a haunting performance because like, again, there's nothing going on with him when he like speaks a lot, but there's everything going on behind the eyes. Like if he was my partner in anything, I would absolutely hate him. And this is the main difference between the hitmen in every other season of Fargo comparatively to the film. In the film, they're an odd couple and they hate each other. But every hitman in the Fargo series, they have like a good relationship. Like Mr. Wrench and Mr. Numbers are probably lovers, or at the very least, like brothers. Yeah. Like emotional brothers, obviously. You know, fucking Mimo and Yuri Gurka. Yeah. Yuri Gurka, they're just like, they're like friendly with each other. They're probably the closest thing we have to like Steve Buscemi and Peter Stormare, but like they're still friends. Like everyone's friends when they're hitmen. Like the Kitchen Brothers are obviously brothers. The people in our seasons like each other. But again, it's like a really interesting dynamic that adds to Jerry's plight, because it's like, oh, these these two guys never would have gotten any job done because they hate each other, and the inevitability of them killing each other is like very high.
And you get that immediately because like it's just Buscemi talking in the car and like Stormare being like completely unamused. And at first you're just like, oh, this is funny. Like this, that they have character differences. But once that cop scene happens when they get pulled over and then everything goes wrong, like you realize, oh, this has dangerous consequences. I didn't know he was a Swedish actor until like this morning.
Yeah, right.
And I watched this movie and I'm like, this guy is going to be the biggest like movie villain for the next 30 years. And he's worked very consistently on a lot of projects, but like I'm sort of disappointed that like Fargo was the big thing that he did, because I like you said, there's so much going on behind the eyes. One of my favorite scenes of his is when he's eating lunch or dinner, whatever it is, in the cabin, and he's watching a daytime soap opera, and like there's a big reveal, like I'm pregnant, and then it cuts back to him and he goes like, whoa, like he makes a little face like he's like, oh wow, like he's really into it.
Yeah.
His like mouth is open and he's like, that's insane. And then Buscemi comes back in, and then the axe scene happens, which is incredible. But he's really, really good in this movie. And it's funny, the first time I watched this, which I was definitely too young to fully appreciate the performance, but first time I watched it, I was like, oh, I really like Buscemi a lot more because like he's talking more, you know? Like I didn't appreciate the Stormare performance because I remember being kind of disappointed. I was like, I wish that this guy did more and had more to do and more to say and more. I wanted more out of it. But now it sort of has flipped. I think both of them are great, but he particularly really steals the show when I rewatched it this last time.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible that he didn't get nominated for an Oscar, because this is the Anton Chigurh performance from No Country for Old Men, like great 10 years before. Because and again, I think Javier Bardem in that film has, and we'll talk about that film one day because I absolutely love that movie. But I think this is a better performance simply because he doesn't have as much to work with as Anton does in No Country for Old Men. Javier Bardem in that film has so many cool moments. He's basically just playing Hansi in Fargo season 2 for like 2.5 hours. Like he is frightening. He is scary. He kills people. Like Peter Stormare in this film, like does so much with, and again, I'm not saying like it's a bad character or anything. I'm just saying like it's a character that is supposed to be silent, and he's supposed to be deadly. There's not a lot there to talk, like to have dialogue with. But it is a wonderful performance, and I agree with you, Dan. I am so sad that he hasn't done more villainous performances, like again, like a random Pirates of the Caribbean. Like he was in John Wick 2. He was the main villain in John Wick 2. Yeah. He was like a sub to main villain in 22 Jump Street. An actor who is super prolific as well. Not a household name. Most people just think of him as the guy in Fargo, which again wouldn't be the worst thing. But he also has almost 200 credits on his IMDb. Yeah, he works. And he's working in this movie so well, and he adds so much. I think a surprisingly wonderful performance is, because Frances McDormand is wonderful and we all know that, but Peter Stormare in this film, like it is just a riveting performance. And the iconic shot when he's when he's putting the foot in the wood chipper, and he like turns to see Marge, and he's like, it like looks like a kid who just like shit his pants, you know? It like, it's like, and like doesn't, and like doesn't care that much. Like he's just like, so like, again, this character is so unaffectionate, and he's so like just understanding of his own universe. So like he doesn't think it's a horrible thing that he's doing. He's just angry that he got caught. You know, he's just like confused that he's gotten caught in this moment, because in his world this is just like a normal Tuesday or whatever.
Totally.
And sorry, that's just such a long-winded praise of Peter Stormare and the bleached. You gotta give it up for the bleached tips.
Gotta talk about the bleached hair. Yeah. It's such an iconic look. Like he just really does stand out. It is sort of it's a thankless job because there's not like so many shiny moments. There's not a ton of, I honestly, I don't even know what my reaction would be if the Coens handed me a script and said, this is the character you're going to play. And then you read it and you're like, there's no lines. In the description, it just says he walks from point A to point B, or he looks this way, or he does this. Like there's not, I don't think that I haven't read the script, but I don't think there's all that much within the script itself to indicate like, oh, here's where you can really act your ass off. But he somehow does it, you know? He really, he makes the most of it. And every time he shows up, I'm like, oh, here we go. Here it is. Another scene with my guy. And the bleach tips. My God, so good.
I was definitely scared of Peter Stormare growing up. And I know he just looks like a guy, you know. Like
that's a great point. He looks like because like the running joke throughout the movie is that Steve Buscemi's character is just funny looking. And like nobody takes him seriously. And I think you did a great job of saying like he thinks he's suave, but he's not. He is in fact funny looking and weird and like small. And like he's just like, he's not that he thinks he's a ladies' man. Also, he's not. He's just like hooking up with prostitutes. He thinks he's so much cooler than he is. But the Peter Stormare character like knows who he is, knows the world he's in, like you said, and is okay with that. And there's nothing scarier than a dude that looks like that who is quiet and violent. Like at no point are you scared of Steve Buscemi's character because there's nothing to be afraid of, you know, until the end when he starts getting a little trigger happy. But the entire time you're like, there's again, I've used this metaphor, but like something's boiling within this man, and like if Buscemi keeps talking, the top is gonna blow off of this pot, and eventually it does, and it leads to the wood chipper scene, to moments of incredible violence. Which before we talk about Marge, I just want to talk about the violence in the movie a little bit because they're like incredible punctuation points on the movie. They don't happen that often, but when they do, it's like very quick, impactful. It's not terribly stylish. It's very matter of fact, similar to the rest of the movie. Again, we've talked about this before, but it's almost a little bit Lynchian, the wood chipper scene. It's just like,
totally.
It's just a regular guy with some sweet frosted tips working on a wood chipper. The only thing that's different is that instead of a block of wood, it's a human body.
It's a foot. Yeah, it's a
and
foot. There's so much blood just like on the snow. And like, again, we always we fucking talk about this all the time on the pod, but it's just like that white, that snow, that pure snow that's so idyllic and natural and wonderful in most films is just trashed with red. It's just like so like, and it's like a vicious red really too. It's just like a red that makes you go like, oh my, like with the snow mixed with the snow, you're just like, holy shit, like that's gnarly. And like the part of the film that's based off a true story, that's actually based off a true story, is the wood chipper scene. And like, again, that is based off a true story. It's not, none of that really happened like that, but like just that is one of the most grisly murders I've ever heard. And it's really funny because when you think of that scene, it is so like ingrained in, like, even if you don't know about Fargo, you know about the wood chipper scene. Yeah. And it's so ingrained in society, and it's kind of a comparison to The Walking Dead. In the first season of The Walking Dead, you're really grossed out by zombies. By season 10, you're like, oh, this is like a Sunday afternoon right now. And it's the same thing with Fargo. Like, if you really think of a wood chipper, like someone getting murdered in a wood chipper, that is horrible. But because it's so ingrained in society, you don't really think of it that way anymore, because it's just like we're so desensitized to shit like that because there's so many shows out there that their goal is to try to do something like that, to be remembered. But I still think this does such a good job because there's no real scream or anything by Steve Buscemi. It's just like you just hear the wood chipper going. You just see the blood. That's all it is.
And it's also, because this was a question that Joshua James Richards asked Deakins on the podcast, was like, how do you go about making an iconic scene like that? Like, how do you go about, is there some sort of intentionality behind these iconic moments in your career, whether it's Shawshank or whether it's Fargo or whatever? And obviously Deacon's like, if you ask any artist a question like that, they'll be like, nah, it's in the script. We talk about it on the day. Like, it's a very practical thing. But I think the reason that it's iconic is because, like, within the context of the movie, it's just a practical thing. It's just a guy making a practical choice to put a body through a wood chipper because that makes sense in the moment, Yeah. It's not like it's not like one of these knockoff Fargo movies where, like, they would do something horrific to a body. They would stuff a foot down the garbage disposal, like they're doing that for the shock of it, as opposed to using the characters in the story appropriately in order to make something that's weird and violent into something iconic. Because in the movie, it's a practical thing. It's just that's how you would dispose of a body in that moment. Yeah. There's no other way to do it. And so it feels natural and it feels within the character, especially because of the way that Stormare's completely desensitized to violence in this movie. And that's why it works, is because it feels right. It feels natural. And then there is this Lynchian sort of quality where it's like there is just something slightly off kilter. In other things where there's violent moments like that, it doesn't feel right because you can tell it's not a character choice. It's not a choice of practicality. It's a choice of the writer or the studio being like, this would be crazy.
Yeah, like that's such a great point. And I recently rewatched Saw.
Hell yeah.
Which is an awesome movie. But every fucking thing in that movie is like, what's the craziest shit we can pull off? And like, I love how you discuss the practicality behind the wood chipper. Because it's literally practical. He has two bodies. He's got to get rid of them. Like, how else is he going to fucking get rid of them? Like, there's a wood chipper out in this cabin. He's going to do that, cover it all up, and then he's going to go on his merry way, and drive away, and it'll be all good. And lastly, we're winding down here. I think we probably have like 20-ish minutes of like actual recording. Who knows? Maybe that translates to 10 when we edit it down. But let's talk about like the true star of the film, the true star of Fargo, the Oscar award winner, and all around awesome, cool, normal person. And that's something I also want to talk about. I'm looking at the IMDb right now for this. William H. Macy, Frances McDormand, Steve Buscemi, and Peter Stormare, the 4 top build people. They just like look like normal people. And like, that's what I love about Coen Brothers movies, is like, they really make like, even like Josh Brolin, who is so handsome and sexy, they like put a mustache on him and a cowboy hat and No Country for Old Men. Just looks like a guy. I love all of the Coen's movies because they like, I mean, again, they're the people they work with regularly are like Frances McDormand and John Turturro. Yeah. Like just dudes. Just dudes and guys, just like people that like look like normal people. And I love that so much. And Frances McDormand adds so much to this film as Marge Gunderson. And like, she really creates the archetypal cop character that we see run throughout Fargo. One thing I love about Fargo through the movie and the series is like, it's not hard to figure out what happened. The characters usually figure it out pretty quickly. It's just proving it and catching the bad guys. That's the tough part. And so Marge is just like doing her job and doing it well and is in the right place at the right time and is well-intentioned and it just generally like funny and kind. And a lot of that comes back to Frances McDormand's performance. And let's do this now. I want to know, when in the movie did Frances McDormand win the Oscar? Because like, there's always a scene or a moment when Oscar-winning actor X wins it. Like, there's the moment where it's like, oh, as long as they don't screw it up for the last 35 minutes or the last 20 minutes or the last hour, they're going to win the Oscar. And so I'm curious for you when that was in this movie. When do you think Frances McDormand had it locked up? I want to say it's one of her first or second scenes with, and again, this isn't a fun answer, but I think this just is so apparent to me. I think one of the early John Carroll Lynch scenes she has, just like the simple, I love her performance in this because it's literally the little things, it's just, it's just the little things she does throughout. And like, just the just the way like her and John Carroll Lynch act with each other is like, oh, these people are actually married.
Totally.
Like this is an actual marriage right now. And I feel like for me, that is all I need. Cause like, I don't know, there's so many parts in a movie where you're like, okay, this person's acting. I always think of that scene in, it won Best Picture in 2015 or 2016. It was 2015 film, one in 2016. Spotlight. I always think of Spotlight. Yeah. And I always think of that one scene with Mark Ruffalo where he's like, the kids, man, they're fucking kids.
And they got away with it.
And they got away with it. Yeah. It's like, again, a great performance, I think, and deserving of a nomination, of course, but like that's acting.
Yeah.
And Frances McDormand, fun fact, is also acting in this. And I guess long story short, it's like the little things she does throughout this movie. And a lot of it comes with John Carroll Lynch. Like one of my favorite shots, I talked about it on a previous pod, but like it's when they're just in bed at the end and they're like cuddling up close. And it's just like all of their scenes are just them eating. And it's like so natural, so wonderful. And like, yeah. That's when she fucking won the Oscar, when she was like chowing down on some pancakes.
I also love the relationship between those two. John Carroll Lynch has always been one of my favorite supporting actors. Whenever he shows up in a movie, I'm like, yes, please, more. And I love how the movie treats them too, because like at the end of the movie, John Carroll Lynch, his I think it was a mallard getting on a 3-cent stamp is just as important as Frances McDormand saving the day and shooting Stormare in the leg and solving the crime. That's like how the movie ends. He's just like, hey, guess what happened? And then she's like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Yeah. All right. And I'm pregnant and we're going to have a baby in a couple months. And then it just ends. And it's like, that's really funny. I do think the reason I asked the question in the first place was because like, usually it happens later into a movie when someone has the big Mark Ruffalo sort of speech, where I think she really just locks it up, is the very first crime scene when they're investigating and she like leans over and he's like, what are you looking at? And she's like, no, just think I might throw up. And then she gets up. She's like, just morning sickness. All right, we're okay. Let's go look at the cop. That whole scene, like she locks up the Oscar. It's over. Yeah. At that point, it's like, because you've never seen a police officer like this before. The police officers of the past are cool and slick. And so I think she locks up the Oscar really early. That's why I wanted to ask the question, is because it happens so fast. You know, and she doesn't show up until 30 minutes into the movie. I
was about to say, I'm like thinking like, damn, she really doesn't show up until like halfway, like again, 30 minutes in. And I totally agree with you. It's like she locks it up early, and it's just such a natural performance, like we've been talking about. And it's, it's a thing in cinema that you don't see a lot. And like we always say, like they don't make movies like they used to, and they don't, because like, I read a lot of writing books and all this stuff. And like something I've learned and I hate, it's just like, you gotta make your character likable. And like a lot of the ways they do it nowadays, and Saw, again, every movie you watch, like it connects with a movie you're going to discuss. Like with Saw, it's like you care about Cary Elwes and like, Dr. Gordon in the first film, because he's just like, I have a family, like I need to get to my family. And that's like all he talks about. And like the reason you care about Marge Gunderson so much is like, she's pregnant. She has a husband, but like she never explicitly says that. Right. She never goes to a character and goes like, geez, I hope I make it home for dinner tonight and like see my husband who I'm having this child with. Yeah, like exactly. I love that she never has her baby in this film. Like it's that Alfred Hitchcock thing where to build intensity about a bomb being under a table, you show that a bomb's under the table. And Marge being pregnant is a similar thing. It's kind of like a ticking time bomb. You never know when she's actually going to have the kid. And what Fargo does so well is like, it just never does it. It's just like, she just happens to be pregnant in this moment. And that's always nice. It feels like there's more to the story. Like you're walking into the most interesting moment of someone's life, but their life has
been going on before the movie started, and it's going to continue after the movie's over. The characters are so real, the world is so lived in, that you can imagine other things happening other than the thing that we've just watched over in this case, the hour and 38 minutes. And then at the end of the day, you go back to bed with your husband, and then you wake up the next day and you keep moving. And that's life. That's why these movies feel so natural, is because like life just continues. Like more things will happen in the future. And again, it just, the performance by Frances McDormand really grounds the movie. Yeah, the character, the performance, everything about Marge is perfect. And I guess that transitions into our heck moment of the week. Yours is involving her, so I'll let you go first because I have mine now.
Yeah, okay, cool. Good to know. I think my heck moment of the week, we kind of talked about it already, so I was like, oh, damn. But it's when Marge gets home at the end, and then like John Carroll Lynch is just super excited about his little thing. And then Marge just saved the fucking day and like was a badass for like an hour and a half, or I guess an hour, because she shows up 30 minutes into it. Yeah. And then it's my favorite shot of the film. They just sit there and like she leans on them and they're just like talking about the news, I think, or something that's going on the TV. And it's just really sweet. And the movie ends. And then you're like, heck, that was sweet. And that's definitely my heck moment of the week. And again, it's not a flashy one. It's not like someone gets hit in the head with an AC unit.
Right.
But it's a really sweet one. And I think that it summarizes Fargo so well. And when I was watching it again, I was just like, damn, this is a great movie. And like that last shot juxtaposed with the first shot of the film, which is the first actual shot of the film, is just like a white mess and like you don't know what's going on. And it's just like the ending just being like two people just cuddling. It's just so nice. And that's how season 2 ends also. So
there's so much heart behind the violence, and at the end of the day, that's what the movie hangs its hat on, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'll go in the complete opposite direction. My heck moment is when Steve Buscemi gets shot in the face.
Yeah, that's the heck moment of this whole thing. You know, that's
one of my favorite. I said one of my favorite things is characters that are simple, like simpletons, well-intentioned but make mistakes. Another favorite thing of mine in movies is injuries. I love like injuries that actually matter. I love when a character gets injured. Someone breaks an ankle and now they have to like limp along for the rest of the movie. I love things that just affect the character in small ways for the remainder of the film. And so Buscemi goes up there to do the exchange. It's not going the way he wanted. Also, 2 of my favorite lines come out of the getting shot in the face thing. Buscemi goes, "I gave simple fucking instructions" to the father-in-law. And like, I can't believe that's not a huge meme. But that's a side thing. He gets shot in the face. It looks painful. And then he's got to just deal with that for the rest of the movie.
Yeah,
and also
he's
just bleeding for the rest of the movie. And then he goes and buries the money. And you think that they're going to come back to that. And again, that's just like one of those great Coen Brothers things where like in the moment, he's going to go bury the money. And then you think he'll be okay. You know, you think he's going to get out of this. Cause like that getting shot in the face, that was the thing. Like he's not going to get hurt worse. He's not going to die now. Cause like he's just gotten shot in the face. And then he shows back up to the cabin and he's like, I got the 80 grand. He's trying to play Stormare's character. And so he's like, here's your half, here's my half. I'm going to take the car and then go. And he's like, no, you give me half of the money for the car. And he's like, how do you split a car? And then he gets mad and he's like, I got shot in the fucking face.
Yeah. It's like, what have you been doing this whole fucking time? Like,
and then he gets axed. And so like, yeah,
literally
him getting shot in the face is like as bad as it could possibly go. Because the whole movie, he's getting his ass kicked a little bit. Like he is getting made fun. Everyone's calling him funny looking. He gets beat up by Shep at one point. He's like this pathetic little weakling, this total loser. And then he shows up for this thing and gets shot in the face. Nothing goes right for him. And it's really funny.
Yeah. And also it's really funny because, again, it's simple instructions. He wanted Jerry to come, then he was going to kill Jerry and take the money. See, like every bad character in this movie just has a simple plan that involves them getting more money. And it always backfires on them. Like Jerry's whole situation, like Jerry's still in prison as far as I'm concerned. The father gets shot and then Steve Buscemi's like, okay, how can I make more money? It's like, okay, I'll hide this half because it's way more money than I expected. And then I'll just give Peter Stormare's character like a little bit of that. And then I'll just have more money and then we'll call it a day. And then Peter Stormare is a crazy person. So he murders him because of the car. But it's also great that like that halfway through the movie, like they come back to the cabin and Jerry's wife is just dead.
Right. Yeah. And I just remembered what I was going to say earlier. You mentioned that like everyone has a plan to like get more money, and connecting that back to like what we were talking about with like how usually there's like a big monologue for the main character. The closest that we get to that is Frances McDormand saying like, look at what you did all for just a little bit of money. And that's like the biggest, like that's the biggest that the Coen brothers go in terms of like trying to tell the audience something. So I certainly wouldn't say that this movie's like anti-capitalist, but very suspicious of the ways in which that people make money like this, you know, the ways in which that the system allows for stuff like this to happen.
Exactly.
And it's a deeply American text. And I think we've talked about this before with Fargo. It's a very American story, and it's very much rooted in American issues. And I felt I've always appreciated the fact that like Marge has that line at the end, because it's clear, but like making it slightly more explicit is valuable. I think it's like, yeah, you killed all of these people just for because it's really not a lot of money.
No.
I mean, it could be life-changing money. I forget how much it was, but like honestly, like that's not like, it's not like Ocean's 11 where it's like we're gonna get like $50 trillion out of the Bellagio or wherever. There's no amount of money that would justify killing another human being, obviously.
Totally.
But like even if it's Ocean's 11 money, like that makes more sense that like you would go to great lengths to get it. In this movie, it's like these are simple people with simple goals, and small amount of money will cause them to do just about anything. And they do just about anything.
And I don't know, it's a pretty incredible film. There's a lot we didn't discuss. It's a dense hour and 38-minute film. But there's just so many little scenes like, oh, they're going crazy down by the lake. That's what they kept saying. There's so many great moments in this film, and we implore you to check them out again. Because this is a really good film. It's a really great film. There's so much Fargo in this universe now that we live in that's insane. But like something I love and something we keep saying about this film is that it's simple. And it's really good simple. It's such a good bowl of cereal. And it's like weird to compare it to a bowl of cereal, but like that's it. Like that's really it. You know, they put cereal in a bowl and then you put some milk in it and then you're like, wow, this is wonderful, this is good, this is all I need right now. And that is, again, it's a very complex film too, like what we said, but like it is just it's so good, it's so refreshing to watch. And yeah, it's just a great film.
It's an excellent film. It's an American classic. It's probably one of the 100 best movies that's ever been made. It's an absolute masterpiece. I think people realized it when it came out. It's only gotten even more acclaim in the years since. And I don't imagine a time that this movie feels dated. I can't imagine some 18-year-old in 40 years being like, Fargo, that's an old movie. Like, whatever, you know? Like, I think this movie holds up. I think this stands the test of time. I think it's just a great movie. And even though it takes place in 1987, it will always, like I said earlier, it will always ring true because there's always going to be like small town crimes. I mean, anytime you turn on the local news, you'll see a Fargo movie, you know? And I think that's kind of the beauty of it.
We love Fargo. That's no secret. This is what started it all. And I know this has been another installment of This Is a True Podcast. I have been Tyler.
And I have been Daniel.
And thank you guys so much for watching. Check out our other stuff when you get the chance to. We got a Bong Joon-ho series going on. We got a couple more movies there. We got some NBA pods in there, yeah. And I don't know, we just got a lot of cool stuff going on and nothing notable. And hopefully soon we'll start making some sketch comedy again. But for now, Fargo is awesome. Fargo is great. And we got 2 more things to review after this one. So, check out that 1999. Check out that 1996 movie if you haven't checked it out in a while. And also shout out to Mike. Mike's just awesome in this movie.
Shout out to Mike.
Yep. He's sad, and that is also an aw-heck moment. But again, we couldn't talk about everything, but it was great. That's it. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Bye.
I ought to know. I'm the executive sales manager. That's one of my favorite lines.